Hi, I'm Bob Kraus. I'm president of the Veterans National Recovery Center, and today we're going to talk about a United States military service that not many people know a lot about, and that is the United States Coast Guard, founded in 1790. And we're going to talk to George Rogerson, who is a veteran of the Coast Guard during the time right around Korea, a little bit after Korea. And he's going to tell about his time on Alaska. And this is one of the boats he served on right here. Now, this is the USS Northwind, and it is an icebreaker, and it still holds the world's record for breaking the thickest ice. So that's quite an accomplishment.
Yes.
Yes. So tell me about it, George. Now, tell me how you got in and what y'all did.
I joined in 1948 when I was 18 years old, and I always said the Coast Guard finished raising me. And so then from there I went to basic training at Cape May, New Jersey, and they give us an aptitude test at the end of basic training. And I always thought maybe I'd like to be a cook and baker, but after they took my test, and he said, no way, we're sending you to engineman school. So I spent, I think it was like 18 weeks in New London, Connecticut, on a training base there to Seattle. And from Seattle then I was placed aboard the Northwind, which is, she had three sister ships, identical. The West Wind and East Wind and the South Wind. South Wind was given to the Russians, and they gave her back after they abandoned her at the North Pole. Now the ship there, the North Wind, she had quite a history. She took Admiral Byrd to the Antarctic twice.
No kidding.
And brought her back, and her point of the duty that I was on her, we were to go and recover the South Wind. She was froze in at Point Barrow, and
that was up in northern Alaska.
The North Pole.
The North Pole. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the ship is a marvelous piece of engineering. She's 338 foot long, three main engine rooms. She's diesel electric, and she had a lot of horsepower. And people wonder how they broke ice. Well, this up in the forward part of the ship in the bow, she had a pair of wings, and then also she had a propulsion motor down in her bow, which driven a propeller, and she get ready to bust ice. She had from bow to stern, she had 19-inch circulating lines, and they would pump seawater into the stern in a void tank, and which was a lot of water, and they'd raise her bow, and then they'd charge into the ice. Then the wings would be set on top of the ice. Then they'd start the forward motor, pull a vacuum under the ice, then pump the water all forward, and she'd settle down in the ice.
And that was, were you on it when they broke the world's record then?
No, she done that in the Antarctic with Admiral Byrd. Matter of fact, she went down there twice. She took supplies down the second time.
Wow. Yeah. So now, when you went up to your first mission on this ship was to rescue the
South Wind.
South Wind from the ice. How long did it take you to get up there?
18 months.
18 months of breaking ice to get to that ship.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that you'd have enough food to go 18 months on something like that.
Well, that's before helicopters, but there were supply ships that followed the icebreaker.
Huh, I'll be darned.
Yeah.
So when you got there, well, 18 months, were you able to talk to your family or anybody? Or?
Well, yeah, they had lines of communication set up for us, and but there was a great amount of isolation in Alaska at that time. That was before cell phones and TV.
So there was nobody to talk to, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, yeah, they had it set up on the radio so that you could call your parents, and it was not quite frequently either, but they would get back to the States and get you whoever you want to talk to.
Huh, I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Well, so now you went for 18 months, and it was either all daylight or all night light, I
Yeah,
guess.
well, it started I'll never forget, it started on Mother's Day. We left Seattle, and that was in 49. And that's when things were starting to cook up with Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you notice on that picture, the ship has mounted guns, and she had 3 turns, forward turns, and she had on each side, port and starboard, she had anti-aircraft guns. And everybody thinks the Coast Guard is non-combative, but every one of their ships is armed.
Yeah, I can imagine that would have been a tight time. So 18 months, you probably were still on the ship going north when the Korean War broke out.
Yes.
Yeah. You were, huh?
Yeah.
So, because that happened in June of 1950.
Yeah. And we got there, and they decided then that the ship wasn't worth salvaging, and head back.
So you just turned around and left it out there.
Yeah, as far as I know, she sank up there.
Oh my goodness. So it was an 18-month trip to rescue a ship that couldn't be rescued.
But it was a good experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we stood 6-hour watches, and then we'd have 6 hours off and 6 hours on. And they're powerful vessels.
Mm-hmm.
They had 6 opposed piston Fairbanks engines, and they stood 18 foot tall, and probably right at 28 foot long.
Now, when you got back to the back down into the Bering Sea, then I know there was a lot of friction with the Russians.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
There was Russian ships prowling through the Gulf of Alaska at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Some of their ships were armed and some were not, but they were challenged.
Were you with the challenging fleet?
You had to board the ships, the foreign ships, and check their manifests and check their papers.
So that's what you would do. You would be part of that crew.
And then they always tried to play like they couldn't speak English. And so one of our officers would tell them, okay, we're going to take you into port, and we'll see how many can speak English. And invariably one would step forward and could speak English.
So were there any threatening signs, like guns levied or anything like that?
No, they were very cautious about it, though, our government was, because Coast Guard was not to relay any weather from the light stations to those ships. And they were not to converse with them at all. And just told them that's a restricted area and they had no business in there.
How long did those sorties by the Russians last? Throughout the war?
No, they were restricted then. They stopped them at Attu up on the Aleutian Islands. They stopped them there and wouldn't let them come any further.
Now, so how long were you on the North Wind?
3 years.
3 years. So you probably would have got off the North Wind in about, 52 then?
Yeah, and was transferred then to Base Ketchikan, who had just received 4, I believe it was, 50-foot patrol boats that would air sea rescue.
Yeah, well, now that's, Ketchikan was that where you met your wife?
Yeah, she was raised there.
She was raised in Ketchikan, so
Yeah.
you married a native is what she did.
Yeah,
right?
well, her mother had gone to Seattle so she could be born in the United States and become a citizen. And because Alaska then was territory. Yeah, and yeah, we married there, and I was.
How did you meet her?
She sold tickets in the theater, and just went to the show. Had nothing else to do in that little 7,000 people. But I seen her one day. It was raining as naturally there in Ketchikan. It rains all the time. And I was driving a Coast Guard pickup truck, and I pulled up to the stop sign, and here she come across the street in that rain with the rain gear on. So I bopped the horn at her, and she turned around and stuck her tongue out at me.
Well, I guess you always have to marry the spunky ones.
Yeah,
George, don't
that's
you?
right.
That's a good story. Yeah, and so you were married for how many years to this lady?
77.
77 years of marriage. That's wonderful. And coincidentally, we both go to the same church, and George's daughter Beth is here.
Yes.
And so I see George just about every week or so,
Right.
and his daughter, and so I get to hear all these stories, and I know for a fact that you did more than just meet the love of your life there.
Yeah.
You had that 50-footer rescue ship.
Yes.
And tell us about that.
Well, they were built of wood, and they were built in New Orleans at the Higgins Boat Works. And the reason people always say, why do they build patrol boats out of wood? They never heard of a magnetic mine.
No, that would do it.
Yeah. And they were quite well built, though. They were capable of a 4-man crew. However, we only had 2 on them. They had twin Chrysler Royal Marines engines, 8 cylinders. Had their own generator. Had a full galley on them. And just pretty much fully equipped. And they too were armed. But most of that duty for those were air sea rescue, especially during the fishing season.
Well, you had some fairly dramatic ones that you were involved in. Tell me about anyone that you thought was really interesting.
Well, the one that I always remained in my mind was Pan Am used an airstrip on Annette Island, which was put there by the U.S. Navy, the airstrip was. And Annette sits 18 miles southwest of Ketchikan. And Pan Am flew in there one night and misjudged their coordinates, and it's foggy, and clipped the top of the mountain and spun her into the sea and lost everybody on her. And so our job was, of course, to go and assist where needed, and we were sent right away. And then the next day we started dragging for bodies to recover. And that went on for about a week and a half.
How many bodies did you recover out of the whole bunch?
They were something like only 14 bodies recovered. 14.
Yeah. Well, you were telling me about one that was kind of gruesome.
Yeah. Well, the dragging apparatus we use would go very deep, and we snagged onto something and we pulled it up, and it was a man, and he had a huge sea crab right in the middle of his face.
Oh boy.
And I haven't ate crab since then.
Yeah, that would change your view. I know that in the Army, they got graves registration people, and they do something very similar. And often they get PTSD from that because just dealing with all the ravages of on the bodies. But I know there was another one you had with a ship, and you went up and performed a sea rescue. It was taken on water. What was that one?
Well, it was what it was a Japanese mothership, which they were allowed to come into the various grounds, like crab grounds, shrimp grounds, and they'd bring small boats with them, and small boats would fish and then take them back to the mothership, and they had a cannery aboard that ship, and they would manufacture the shrimp, and it all ended up going back to Japan. But that ship got lost its bearings somewhere along the line, and they run aground with her, and she was taking on water pretty heavily. And of course by then they were starting to abandon, and there wasn't enough of us around to gather up what was going on, but we did what we could do. And then they sent there was a salvage company out of Seattle. I used to know the name, I can't remember now. But they were sent there then to clear that, because she was sitting in such a position, she was blocking the steamboat channels. And they pulled her off of there, and then I think they cut her up. But she was, those type of things, they always told us in the Coast Guard, never count the ones that you helped. Count the ones you didn't help.
That's a real tough thing to say, isn't it?
Yeah.
Were there many lost in that one?
I'm not sure how many they lost in crew, but I'm sure it was quite a few. And when you get into water that deep, and there's just no sense attempting to recover.
Yeah, they're going to the deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, now, so you were up there, and about how many rescues did you perform during that time?
During the fishing season, there's probably a dozen every fishing season.
So you had 12 life or death events in front of you every year?
Every 24 hours.
Every 24 hours.
Yeah.
Wow. A dozen every 24 hours?
No, but overall.
Yeah, in a 24-hour you did.
And most of those were caused by carelessness on the people's part that were running the fishing vessels. Yeah. And then some of them would overfish and get too much fish on their boat, and then they'd ask for help. And since then, the Coast Guard has started charging them for recovery of those type of emergencies.
Yeah, no sense the government helping out people that are sinking their own boat with all the fish.
And one part that I thought would be interesting too was when I met my wife, she had given me a picture of graduation, and I had it on my 50-footer. And so one night operations called and said there's a tug at New England Cannery is taking on water, and you go and help. So we went, and there was a fellow on there, he was trying to help, and I said, well, we have hot coffee going, do you want to come over? And yeah. So he said, you know any people now and they've been here? And I said, oh yeah, quite a few. And he said, how do you like it? And I said, oh, I like it really well. And her picture was sitting there, and So a couple of weeks later, she came down and said, Mom would like to have you come to dinner. My dad's here. And I said, okay. So I went up there, and she introduced me. She said, Dad, this is my friend George. He stood up, and it was the same guy that was on that tugboat.
No kidding.
And then I began to wonder, what did I say?
Oh my! So you rescued her dad?
Yeah. They had he run a tug for New England Cannery, and they towed their fish traps with it.
Huh. Well, that is fascinating. And so that puts the girl that was one day she's sticking her tongue out at you, and the next day she's inviting you over for supper.
Yeah.
That's quite a swing. It doesn't usually happen that way.
No.
That's amazing. Yeah. Now, while you were up there, I know you also there, and this is a picture of where you were staying. Is this the Hotel Rogerson here?
Yeah, that's where we were there to rebuild the equipment, and that's the only place I had to sleep was in the tower.
So, and this was Cape
Hinchinbrook.
Hinchinbrook. Okay.
That sits right in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska.
Okay, right
On a mountain. On Hinchinbrook.
On a mountain. Okay, so this is on a mountaintop.
Yeah.
And you're up a little bit above that too. Wow, that's way out in the woods, I guess.
Yeah.
The boondocks.
It's isolated duty for the people that are on there.
Yeah. Now you said how many of these lighthouses were there that you had in your domain?
13.
13 of them.
You see, the coast of Alaska is greater than the Atlantic and Pacific coast put together.
Wow.
And that's
nobody realizes that.
No. And so that's the need for those. And right now they're remote control, but there are two just very close to Ketchikan, and they were family stations. And the men could have their wives there and children. And part of the 50-foot boat's duty was to take tutors out for the kids could have school.
Oh, what a nice story. Now, were there any of these on the North Slope too, or was it mostly in the bay?
Mostly in
the Gulf.
In the Gulf, and with the exceptions, one south of town. They Tree Point and Mary Island, and then there's one there. If you look through it sometime, it's called Five Fingers, and it sits on a rock. And there's just room enough to walk around the house on the outside. And then there's one south of Hinchinbrook at Mount St. Elias. It's another isolated area on the Gulf.
So you did this during the non-fishing season?
Yeah.
Yes. And then in the fishing season, you were saving, what was it, a dozen a day or a dozen a season?
No, a dozen in season.
Dozen in a season, yeah, but still, that's a lot of bodies.
Yeah.
So what was the funnest or the most interesting lighthouse experience you had?
I'd say St. Elias, because there's a large pinnacle that sits in front of St. Elias, and it's a gathering spot for sea lions. And at low tide, they're out there just barking like mad. You hear them all night long, and there'd be hundreds of them. But we were warned, don't go out there because you get between the lions and the water, they're going to run you right into the water.
Yeah, they kill you. Yeah. Wow, that's quite an adventure. Now, how did you wind up? Your last duty was on the 50-foot rescue boat.
Yeah.
And then, but you'd been to all 13 of these lighthouses to service them in some fashion. And then what happened?
Well, when you went to Alaska, you were bound by duty to be there for 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, you could apply for rotation. So I stayed an extra 2, so I was there 4 years because I enjoyed it. And then my wife wanted to come to the States, but she hadn't spent hardly any time in. And so I put in for rotation and reported to St. Louis which is the district office for the 2nd District of the Coast Guard. And I was transferred then to Vicksburg, Mississippi on a tender that we run from Baton Rouge to Greenville, Mississippi. And that was every other week we'd do that. And our basic job was to maintain aids and navigation on the river, the lamps and the lights. The Corps engineers took care of the buoy business. And then from there I was transferred to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I was on a small 65-foot tender there, and we run up and down the Tennessee River and patrolled that. And a huge lake there in Chattanooga, it's called the Lake Chickamauga, and there was a lot of boating activity on that lake.
So you did a lot of rescue work,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah. So, what was the most dramatic rescue there you had?
Well, we had, I think there was we had to lock in and out like 6 or 7 times between Gunnersville, Alabama and Chattanooga. Well, we had a partner catastrophe. A pleasure boat got into the locks, and then the pumps refused to work or something, and they were stranded in that lock.
Hold on.
So finally, they got the everything operating, and then we had to go in and get them out of there. And and the lower river is so desperately wild that it's terrible. We were coming across just outside of Natchez, Mississippi one night, and there was a pleasure craft tied up to a bank on the river on a crossing, and that particular crossing, that bank had been shedding probably half-acre of dirt off of it a 24-hour period of time from the river.
Wow.
So we needed to pull up there and get those people out of there and tell them they're in a bad spot.
Yeah, that would. They would have gone down, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it happened to be there was a guy out of Chicago who run a bunch of television ads. He's called himself Madman Muntz, and that was his boat, and he was on there, and he had Jerry Colonna on there with him. We were taking a cruise.
Oh, well, that sounds like it was. Wasn't as exciting as Alaska, but it was pretty good. It was.
No, Alaska was it was an adventure. Let's put it that way. And I had, when I was on maintenance repair at the lighthouses, I'll tell you this little story quickly. We had been, matter of fact, just came from Hindenburg.
The lighthouse.
Yeah,
Lighthouse, this one here.
we caught a ship that one of our ships was up there, and they picked us up and took us to Juneau. That's as far as that ship would go. So the only other way to get to Alaska, or Ketchikan rather, was by air. And they fly a lot of those JRF Grumman Geese twin-engine seaplanes. Well, we had a district office in Juneau, so we went there and told them we want to get back to Ketchikan. So they lined us up with Alaska Airlines to fly back. And the plane that we had was flown by the governor's son, Governor Gruling's son.
Oh wow, that's a few years ago.
Yeah. And so we took off, and it was snowing. And they fly by only at land sight. They do not fly by instrumentation. And so we were flying along quite well then, and we got to Wrangell Mountains, and it was really bad. You couldn't see your hand in front of you. So he said, listen, we'll have to sit down for a while and wait, see if this clears up. So he knew of a place called Windham Bay, and we landed there, and we sat and sat and sat. And pretty soon he tried it again, and then we had to come back. And he did that 3 times, and finally he said, you know what, if we continue this, we're going to run out of fuel. So there was a trapper's cabin up on the beach, and there was a skiff or a boat tied up there. And he said, look, he said, I'll get in as close as I can with the plane if one of you will volunteer to get out and jump on that boat and bring it out. We'll all have to stay here for the night. So one of us did. And we all went to the cabin, then anchored the plane and all went into the cabin. And of course, the trapper's cabin there, they leave what's necessary when they were there last time. So wood was there, and I fired up the stove, and there was a bunch of deer jerky there, and that's about what we ate.
And this is a regular commercial airline.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
And so they slept on the floor, and we took turns staying up to keep the fire going, pilot and all. So the next morning he said, well, we'll try her again. So we took off. We got that far as Wrangell, and he had to set her down. And he said, you know what? I'm going to run this thing on into Ketchikan. It's only like, by sea, I think it's about 25, 26 miles. But we're going to run her in like a boat. So we didn't even take off. We just gunned her enough to keep the tail in the water. And that's the way we went on into Ketchikan.
Wow. What a story. Now, that's fascinating. Now, you obviously enjoyed your time. When did you get out of the Coast Guard then?
I got out in 1954. And the reason I quit, I wanted to stay, basically. But while we were in Vicksburg, my oldest son had polio. And
you had to stay with him.
yeah, and next transfer I would have been sent to Boston to do Atlantic patrol in ice patrol, and that was 30 days out, 30 in, 30 out, 30 in, and I just couldn't see leaving my wife and that boy by themselves that period of time. So you know, the Coast Guard's small enough that sooner or later you will be stationed with somebody you've been with before. And that happened to me twice. When I went to get discharged at St. Louis, the personnel officer said, Commander Douglas would like to speak to you. Douglas. Well, it ended up, he had been my engineering officer in Ketchikan. So I went in and asked him, I said, you want to see me, sir? And he said, the only thing I want to see you do is sign that re-enlistment paper. And I just can't do that.
Wow, what a story. Yeah, well, that's a fascinating vignette of what the Coast Guard stands for. It stands for rescuing people, it stands for saving property, it stands for national security of our borders.
Yes.
And you were there in a very historic time, George. And,
Yes, and you know, a lot of people don't realize how close the Japanese came to invading the United States. When they bombed Dutch Harbor in
Dutch Harbor is in the Aleutians. Right?
Yeah, and when they bombed that, they had a sneaking suspicion they were closer than that, because the planes that they flew to bomb, they couldn't came from Japan, fuel-wise.
So they were on one of the more abandoned, remote...
That too. They built a landing strip in that too.
And we didn't even know about it.
No. Coast Guard discovered it, reported it, and then they invaded it and destroyed it. But they had a metal landing strip that they brought and assembled there.
Wow. Yeah. You don't talk about that, you know.
No. But you know, and during that period of time, everybody seemed to be on edge, you know. And so that's why they had the Coast Guard in there and Bering Sea Patrol.
Well, thanks for your time, George. That was just great. And I'd like to just this is George Rogerson, who's a Coast Guard veteran. And thanks for your service, George. I'm Bob Kraus. I'm president of the Veterans National Recovery Center. Have a great day.